If you don't know where you're going, then any path will lead you there. USAID's development goal of strengthening a country's innovation ecosystem starts with improving higher education institutions' capacity for research and innovation. But where do we start? What factors impede or facilitate the growth of research and innovation in a university? How do our higher education institution partners stack up against these, and how can they move forward? Hi, my name is Tillah, the Senior Education Advisor at USAID Philippines, and with me is Rossana Zetina-Beale, Senior Innovation Policy Analyst and STRIDE Project Manager at RTI International. The STRIDE program is USAID Philippines' flagship higher education initiative focused on strengthening Philippine capacity in innovation. It works on three broad areas: improving the regulatory environment and capacity of government partners for innovation, strengthening the linkages between government, industry, and academia, and of course, strengthening the innovation capacity of universities. STRIDE was initially planned for $32 million over 5 years, starting 2013, and subsequently, upon the request of the Philippine government, 2 cost extensions gave STRIDE more funding and a longer runway, with the program now scheduled to end in July of this year, and an additional $6 million, so a total of $38 million over 9 years. This partially explains the success of the program. It had enough time and adequate resources to see some of its longer-term interventions come to fruition. Of course, we also had a fantastic partner in RTI International who was consistently flexible and adaptable to the changing circumstances and demands on the ground. In 2013, the year STRIDE started, the Philippines was ranked 95 out of 141 countries in the Global Innovation Index. 8 years into the program, the Philippines is now in the top half of the global index, reaching 50th in the 2020 survey, and was dubbed as one of the 4 innovation achievers worldwide last year. While we cannot attribute this fully to STRIDE, many of our local partners credit our role as a trusted broker and convener of key stakeholders that made this amazing achievement possible. Our work began with the pioneering innovation ecosystem assessment, which revealed surprising findings that led us to tweak ongoing activities, roll out new ones, and discard others. A core finding was that many disconnects between and among key players in the innovation ecosystem was the lack of trust and understanding of each other. In hindsight, the extra 4 years was important because it took time to build trust among local stakeholders. And key stakeholders held many assumptions about themselves and each other, some of which were completely off the mark. So for example, innovation was sexy and was pushing many universities, including those who are not able or ready to aspire to be research universities. One key actor that STRIDE connected to in a meaningful way was the network of all state-funded higher education institutions called the Philippine Association of State Universities and Colleges, or PASOK. State universities absorb anywhere between 60 to 90% of R&D funding from the Philippine government, which amounts to around 7 billion pesos or around $35 million every year. And while SUCs comprise only 5% of the number of HEIs in the country, 112 out of more than 2,000, they account for almost half of the enrollment. So the first president of PASOK that we worked with, the late Dr. Rick Rotoras, was an engineer and was a firm believer in science, technology, and innovation. And his successor, the president of Batangas State University and current PASOK president, Dr. Tirso Ronquillo, is also an engineer. So there was no need to convince them of the value of what we wanted to do. PASOK recognized the importance of laying a roadmap towards this transformation, and it also recognized the universities need to understand what it would take, where they currently stood, and when benchmarked against these factors. Once they identified where they wanted to go, how to get there, and what they had or did not have to make the journey, only then could they be more purposive in their programs and policies. But how do you do this for all the state universities and colleges? How do you do this in an environment that can be very politicized, where any discussion or weakness might affect institutional reputation and even government funding? This was the birth of the PASOK Innovation Diagnostic Tool.
The Innovation Diagnostic Tool, or IDT, built on a result of a series of interventions and is a true example of collaboration, learning, and adapting. From 2014 to 2018, STRIDE had implemented the Participatory Institutional Diagnostics Tool, or PID for short. The PID was a tool that was administered to 30 plus selected institutions, both public and private, as a set of interviews, probing on competence and effectiveness on 8 categories related to research capacity. Some of these categories included grants, incentives for research, procurement, publications, intellectual property, and commercialization. In 2018, PASUC was working on a new strategy called the Platform for Innovating SUCs for Industry 4.0, PC, as a response to the Philippine government agency's focus on innovation. PC aimed to serve as a roadmap for all state universities and colleges to be a driving force for innovation. PASUC reached out to STRIDE to help implement this strategy. The first step in the implementation of PC was the development of the Innovation Diagnostic tool. This was to help universities identify their specific gaps in research and innovation. However, as we moved forward into the process and conducted the first set of consultations with PASUC members, we received lots of feedback from universities about their concerns with a diagnostic. There was some apprehension from university presidents that if they scored low in the diagnostics, the results could be used against them or their institutions. They also fear that the results will be used to rank their performance against their peers, leading to negative outcomes. To address these concerns, STRIDE conducted a series of intense consultations and dialogue with PASUC leadership, its members, experts, and senior government officials. We also held 5 validation and socialization sessions as we fine-tuned the tool and addressed the concerns of PASUC members. The agreement that we reached, which allowed the diagnostics to move forward without sacrificing its objectives or quality, was that each HEI would be given full access to its scores, but those scores would be treated as confidential and would not be shared with others. It was also agreed that any public dissemination will only show aggregate results of the SUCs at each level. This allowed us to make some distinctions. Resolving this was critical. Once done, we were then able to proceed with the development of the IDT itself. The final tool was a 4-part survey with closed questions, yes, no questions. There were a total of 362 innovation indicators, which when aggregated were plotted to 12 innovation pillars. Each of these pillars was then assessed within a scoring range of 1 to 3, low, average, and high. Surveys were sent electronically to key officials in 112 HEIs, and we received 105 responses. We deemed that the IDT exercise was successful, and we were surprised by the findings. After all the initial apprehension, the scores in the IDT reflected very honest self-assessments from the universities. We had successfully addressed the university's concerns, and we received surveys that showed a surprising amount of vulnerability, with information that was not very flattering to them. Based on results of the self-reports for the 12 variables, none of the universities considered themselves on the highest value of any of the innovation pillars. Most universities gave themselves average scores that put them in the middle axis. These corresponded to long-range, goal-oriented, or planning-heavy pillars, like leadership in infrastructure, linkages and partnerships, industry, and community extension. Universities appeared farthest from the ideal, so when scoring 1 to 1.5, when it came to the nuts and bolts or implementation-heavy pillars such as management, basic applied, and industry-facing research. So overall, only 4% of respondents rated themselves high in the innovation pillars, and 44% rated themselves average, with 52% of them being low. The IDT results then led to, first, an exercise in self-awareness. The IDT was an educational experience which revealed the capabilities and mindset of universities toward innovation and allowed them to reflect on how far or near they were to their aspirations. This would be important as each university has to allocate resources and determine their willingness and capability to do what's necessary to become a research university. Second, it led to better strategic planning for PASUC members. The IDT gave universities valuable insights and provided them with an opportunity to review their strategic plans and roadmaps in the context of the PC. Strategic planning can help determine which specific milestones and programs should be prioritized, and for universities to be more realistic with their plans. As a follow-up to the IDT, STRIDE worked with the Mindanao State University Iligan Institute of Technology to develop an institutional readiness analysis to aid in the next steps for the implementation of their strategic plan. And third and last, For USAID and the STRIDE program, the IDT results allowed focusing on intensifying activities that would address some of the key constraints identified by each university. As an example, STRIDE has launched research training centers in 2 leading HEIs in the country to sustainably provide short courses to researchers from other universities in topics such as research ideation and technology commercialization with industry. To close, we would like to invite you all to the Q&A session where we will have the research lead for this activity, Dr. Napoleon Juanilio, to answer any questions on the development of the tool and how it was adapted to the Philippine context. We will also be happy to answer questions about the process of building trust with our local counterparts. I want to thank USAID Philippines for funding the STRIDE program, Dr. Tirsa Ronquillo, PASUC President, and all of our partner universities and colleges, as well as other partners that made this tool and process possible. Thank you for listening, and we look forward to seeing you in the Q&A session.